I'm about as real as they come.
All my beats tailored by Joe. House Digital.
Maserati, Rick in Detroit. Convertible bird in Miami. Graduated summa cum laude. Strip club made a tsunami. Carlton Hines with the ball game. Grateful Edmonds with the snowflakes. Craig Pettis in the M-Town. Sal Magluta with the boat game. Falcone with the cocaine. Like Freeway Ricky with the plug game. Like Monster Cody in South Central. Larry Davis from close range.
He always acts in as obstreperous a way as he can. It's to live up to his reputation as being the most violent inmate in New York State or American history. Willie today is 33. He is, despite his enormous record of violence, he can be personally very charming. He's very smart. His IQ is near the genius level. His father, amazingly, was the only inmate in American history ever to graduate from college, Phi Beta Kappa, while he was incarcerated.
He was locked up in juvenile facilities at a very early age, early in second grade. He spent most of his childhood in and out of various locked institutions, although he did get counseling of one place or another. He had an extremely chaotic life, and when he began to commit serious crimes, including shooting and killing people on the subway in Harlem, he was given a very long sentence. And so, in Willie's eyes, he was the criminal justice system had been his real parent. Of course, I don't want to absolve Willie from his own responsibility, because Willie, at a number of points in his life, had choices. He could have gone straight, but he was never able to make that choice in a positive way. He always seemed, almost by compulsion, to make the wrong choice. I don't think anything has fundamentally changed about racism in the American criminal justice system. It's been with us a long time, and it's still there. Blacks and other people of color are very overrepresented in our prisons. There's racism really at every level. The more blacks in proportion get arrested by the police, they are probably under more suspicion than whites. When they get in front of judges, they're probably more likely to, or juries, they're more likely to get convicted. They're more likely to get a harsh sentence than a white person. And they're less likely to be released early. And when they end up in prison, in many states, they're going to find a very large proportion of people in the prison are also black. Yes, the racism is very present in the American criminal justice system.
It started out as a story about a young man named Willie Bosket, who as a boy murdered a series of people on the subway in New York. And when I began to look into his record, I found that his father had also been convicted of murder. And then I found that his grandfather and great-grandfather had also been violent criminals. And eventually I traced the family back to a county in South Carolina, which has long been known to historians as being one of, or perhaps the most violent county in the country. So where I started out looking at one young boy in Harlem, I ended up really in a way with a history of violence in America, and it opened up a way to understand violence in a very different fashion than we normally do. That violence does not grow out of the causes that we usually associate it with. It turned out murder is not something new that grows out of our cities. It didn't have anything to do with race or with poverty or with the broken family or with television. In fact, it had a very different origin. The high homicide rates that characterize the United States really have a geographical origin in the white, rural, pre-Civil War South.
Yeah, ask you first about this person right here, this picture. Who is this?
That's Willie. As a boy of 15, he murdered several people on the subway in New York. And before that, he already had a kind of legendary criminal record. He had committed, by his own count, 2,000 crimes, including 200 armed robberies. Later, as an adult, when he was in prison, he continued to commit crimes in prison. He attacked his guards, he threw feces on them, bit their fingers, and in one case stabbed a guard in the chest with a homemade shank.
Where is he today?
Today he's in a cell in a prison in central New York State. It's actually the most solitary confinement of any prisoner in the entire country. They have built a special cell just for Willie. The guards actually call him Hannibal Lecter, as like the character in the movie. When you go to the prison, you have to go through the regular prison, and then you have to go through the normal solitary confinement block. Then you go through another set of doors and gates, and then you come to the area where they have Willie. He's kept in a kind of plexiglass cage. The iron bars are covered over with extra heavy plexiglass, so he can't throw anything out or bite his guards. He's not allowed to have books, newspapers, magazines. He can't listen to the radio or watch TV. In fact, there are 4 TV cameras kept trained on him from outside his cage 24 hours a day, even if he wants to take a shower or go to the bathroom, to keep him under watch. And the guards are not supposed to speak to him. It's really total solitary. They even removed the light fixtures from the ceiling of his cell because at one point he took to eating the light bulbs to show how violent he really could be.
Yo, we back. It's your boy Popalot. Mobb ties. We on our way to NY with it. Headshot City. Manhattan. All my niggas from uptown, y'all niggas get in the comment box. Y'all know how we rocking. Now, today, we are going to be covering one of the most interesting cases, if not definitely bizarre cases that we probably ever covered, but one that we need to cover. And today, we're going to be talking about a guy by the name of William James Bosket Jr. But a lot of people know him by Willie Bosket, and pretty much his life is almost like something of lore or of legend, and we're going to try to break down some of that today. And it pretty much crossed paths of a lot of different things. Like pretty much when I first think about it, makes me think about family support, makes me think about the judicial system, makes me think about racism, and it makes me think about people's circumstances pretty much, because that really determines a lot with who you are and who you become in life. And if you don't believe that, you just probably haven't lived long enough, for real. But now back to Willie Bosket. He is going to be a gentleman. I'm going to say he's probably roughly, I want to say maybe near his 50s now. But he was born December 9th, 1962, and he was convicted of numerous crimes. Pretty much the one that stood out the most, or the one that ended him in jail, because that's the thing about this story just doesn't end on the streets. So I guess when you talk about him, you almost got to talk about the beginning. Now, they said that he was born in Harlem, and his father was a gentleman by Willie Butch Bosket Sr., and he, by all accounts, Willie Bosket came from a life of crime. His dad killed 2 people in a Milwaukee pawn shop shortly after Willie was born, and he was sentenced to life in prison, where he earned a degree in computer science and psychology. And he actually was the first inmate, and this was in Leavenworth Prison, where he gained entrance to Phi Beta Kappa, which is like one of the top, I guess, the smartest learning societies. I don't really know how to even explain that shit because it's so out the realm, but y'all get in the comment box. I know one of y'all can better than I can. But pretty much from prison, he did some stuff that most people can't even do on the streets. Now, he was released. His dad, before we go any further into Willie, just to give you a glimpse into his life, Now, he was released from prison and he went on to get a job as a computer programmer at an aerospace company. But he was eventually charged with a crime there. He would end up shooting his girlfriend and committing suicide to avoid being caught for that crime. So that's pretty much his dad. And they're gonna say he had a traumatic, and this is back to Willie Bosket. He had a traumatic childhood. They're gonna say he went through like some traumatic sexual experiences on behalf of his grandfather, because his grandfather was also a hardened criminal, according to studies. And it's a book out on Willie that in some law, when you're taking law courses, it's required reading that you read the book based on him, and it's written by a guy by the name of Max Butterfield, who is or was author for the New York Times. But yeah, so that pretty much happened. And they're gonna say his mom pretty much had a lot of different living boyfriends who would end up beating her, and then Willie would have to jump in to pretty much defend his mom. And they had some accounts of him hitting a man with a pipe, slashing a guy with a knife, and they said that he also sustained a head injury before he was the age of 10, when he ran out to the street and he was hit by a car. Now, when he was 9 years old, his mother heeding advice from different people positioned that he be placed in a center, stating that he was a person in need of supervision. And he was placed in the Children's Center of Manhattan, but he escaped and he would quickly end up in Spofford, which is like juvenile gladiator school in New York. Anybody that know about Spofford, been to Spofford, y'all know. Y'all get in the comment box. Y'all not from New York, you would not understand it. Now, a child's, they said spending time in Spofford, which was a secure detention center, would be the equivalent of an adult doing a time in Attica State Prison, which is one of New York's well-known prisons. Now, they say he would be in and out of detention centers and reformatories for pretty much up until the time to when he was 21 years old. And it's crazy. They said at one time his mother told him, don't be bullied, hit back. To get respect, you have to be the toughest. Now, it's definitely that advice stuck with him, because they said in the different detention centers he developed a reputation for violence, and he pretty much proved himself. And he told the juvenile authorities when he was serving time then that he would one day be a killer just like his father, because his mom would repeatedly tell him at the young age that you just like your dad. And then when he came to find out what his dad was doing time for, instead of like thinking that's something to look down on, he almost embraced the fact that his father was serving time for those murders. Now, his life would forever change, even though it sounds like it was changed from the womb, but it would forever change on March 19th, 1978, when Bosket, who was 15 years old at that time, shot and killed a guy by the name of Noel Perez on a train. And that was on the 3 train, and that was during an attempt robbery near Harlem and 148th Street, the station. Now, 8 days after that, Bosket and another accomplice shot another man dead, a guy by the name of Moises Perez. So he was unrelated to the first victim, by the way. Now, in another attempted robbery in the back of another 3 train at the 145th Street station, that's where the second robbery happened. Now, Bosket and his accomplice shot a New York City Transit Authority that was working at the Lenox Yard adjacent to the Harlem 145th Street station, and committed 2 more other armed robberies on the A train side station. So They were pretty much sounds like they were frequenting the 3 line and the A line. Now, Bosket was tried for the murders in New York City Family Court, and as his trial went underway, his lawyers were surprised when he decided to plead guilty for both of the murders. He was sentenced to the maximum of 5 years, and this was at a youth facility. And the prosecutors tried to get a longer sentence, but 5 years was the most that he could get under the law at that time. And that's going to be very important, because we talked about how the judicial system impacts on this, and this is where that part is going to come into play. Now, when he got that short sentence, it caused public outcry, and the governor at the time was a guy by the name of Hugh Carey. He had opposed the efforts of his opponents that year in state election, who was a person by the name of Perry Duye, and what they wanted to have passed was to have juveniles tried as an adults for certain crimes. Now, even though he opposed that, he eventually, after reading a report on Willie Bosket's sentence, he called the state legislature, and a special session he started to try to pass the Juvenile Offender Act of 1978. Now, that act is very important, and it pretty much has a lot to do with Willie Bosket, but it also has a lot to do with the Timmons twins and another family that I covered previously, and we will cover more in the future. Now, under that Juvenile Offender Act of 1978, children as young as 13 years old could be tried as adults, and for such crimes as murder, and they can receive the same prison sentence as adults. Now, New York was the first state to enact a law of that nature, and then other states have kind of begun to follow suit. Because it was Willie Bosket's case that was used to push that law, allowing the juveniles to be tried as adults, sometimes it's referred to in law circles as the Willie Bosket law. But the Timmons twins had a lot to do with that as well. Now, after he began serving the sentence for the 2 murders, Bosket would eventually escape from the youth facility where he was held at. He was caught after 2 hours. He was tried as an adult for the escape, and he was sentenced to 4 years in state prison. Now, he would end up being returned to the Division of Youth in 1978, and then he was released in 1983. Now, after 100 days out, he was arrested when a man living in his apartment complex claimed that Bosket had robbed him and assaulted him. And now, while he was awaiting trial for that crime, Bosket assaulted several court officers. So this is where the downward spiral is pretty much going to start to go in play. Now, he was found guilty of attempted assault for the dispute in the apartment, and he was sentenced to 7 years in prison for that. Now, at that point, his escape from the youth facility nearly came back to haunt him when he was 16 years old at the time, meaning he was now considered an adult for criminal purposes. So in New York, escaping from a correctional facility is a felony, even if the facility is a youth facility. So that kind of sums it up. Now, if he had been convicted of assaulting the court officers, it would have been his 3rd felony conviction under the New York's habitual law offender, and he would have been facing an automatic 25-year sentence. But luckily, he was acquitted of those crimes. Now, convinced that he was going to die in prison, he would begin to take his outrage out on correction officers, getting into numerous altercations. Now, they're going to say he was arrested for one of those incidents, and he was convicted of assault and arson. And at that time, he was then sentenced to 25 years to life. And in 1989, he was sentenced to an additional 25 years to life for stabbing a correction officer by the name of Earl Porter. And that was at a maximum correctional facility. Now, after the 1988 attack, Bosket was transferred to a facility by the name of Woodburn Correctional Facility, where in April of 1989 he drew a third 25-year to life sentence for assaulting a correction officer with a chain. Now all three sentences were set to be served consecutively. Now his earliest possible release date, they were saying, was at that time was September 16th, 2062. And they said he would at that time be 100 years old, assuring that he would die in prison, pretty much. Now, and I said at that time because it pretty much went on. Since he was convicted for the 1989 assault, which would be the third one that garnered him the 25-year to life sentence, Bosket was pretty much being housed in the solitary confinement situation. Now, Woodburn was normally a medium security prison. Now, my prison niggas, y'all get it. I don't know if y'all spent time there. Bosket was housed in a specialty built plexiglass lined cell, and it was stripped of everything but the cot, the sink toilet, and the sink toilet combination. And it had 4 video cameras that would watch him at all times. He was only allowed out his cell for 1 hour a day apart for medical visits and then for haircuts. So although he was allowed several visitors, he only could speak to them through the window of his cell. And this story is just kind of just almost outrageous. Movie like, it said that he once declared war on the prison systems, and he claimed that it was the prison systems that made him a monster. And he was, while serving time, because pretty much was doing time his whole life, he was cited for 250 disciplinary violations from this is just from 1985 to 1994. So in less than a 10-year span, he was cited with that. It said that he had not had a disciplinary violation since. Now, and according to a 2008 report by the New York Times, due to numerous incidents of violence during the 1980s and the early 90s, he was initially not slated to move into general population until 1946. So he was going to be in solitary until he was the age of 84. And the words from the department spokesman, who is a guy by the name of Eric Chris, he told the Times verbatim, this guy was violent and threatening violence every day. And even though it's been a while, there are consequences for being violent in prison, and they had no toleration for that. So he was eventually transferred to a facility by the name of 5 Points. Anybody ever spend time, y'all get in the comment box there. And that's going to be a maximum security prison. And he's still in solitary confinement there to that day. They say he's evaluated periodically. And he's still set to join general population in 2046. So y'all let me know what y'all think about the story. What impacted this the most? It was kind of hard for me to just pick one and narrow down on one area. The criminal or the judicial system definitely has a big part, but I think your structure at home and your support that you get from your family, your friends, what kind of friends you have, what kind of role models you look up to, all of that has a vital part in where you end up eventually from your school age days. But that's just my perspective. Y'all make sure y'all follow me on Instagram, on Twitter. It's your boy Popalot, POP_A_LOT. We gonna be back with some more of this real trill spill shit. Y'all make sure y'all get at me in the comment box below. Hit the bell to subscribe, and we'll be back with some more of this real trill spills. The Mobb ties.